Hey everybody, welcome back to part 3 of painting my Stormcast Eternal Liberator. As promised in part 2, this will be the first layering section of the video, or the series of videos if you will. And also as promised in video 2, a lot of this will be going over previously painted areas. So for example, the gold plate, those lifted areas which would naturally light would fall on, going over them in the base colour again. The blue of the shoulders and the tabard down here, going over those in Cantor blue again. And I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to re-pink the handle, the haft of the axe and the hand of the blade. I might go straight into the next layer up with them, but I'll see how I feel when I get to it. And similarly, in a similar way, the silver, I may just go straight into Runefang steel to start the layering effect on that one. Again, I'm not 100% sure. I'll see how I feel when I get to those bits. But we're going to start with the black, as it's the innermost part of the Stormcast for the most part. There are elements, of course, which are further out from the inner parts. So when I mention the inner parts, I mean things like where you can see the undersuit of the armour, like the, in between the armour plates and the arm joints, and in between the leg joint, the leg armour plates as well. I always like to work from the inside out when I've got multiple layers in a certain area. Again, that's not the definite way to do it, it's just my way of doing it. I find it helps me in my process. So let's get straight to it. I've already taken the liberty of getting the paint ready on my palette, and you'll notice I'm using a thinner, sharper detail brush. It's a small layer, so let's just get into it. Now, as I said in both parts 1 and 2 of the video, neatness is it's important. Certainly, it's important in stages 1 and 2, insofar as, it's always nice to have that level of care for your miniature. For any art, for that matter, I would have thought. But certainly as we get to this stage now, where we're actually we're getting to that point of making very specific choices around what we paint, how we paint it. We want to take that little bit of extra vigilance just to make sure that we are painting within the lines, to co-opt a term. I do like that notion. Again, it's not the end of the world if you do, for want of a much better phrase, colour outside of the lines. And especially if you're a viewer of this video and you're fairly new to the hobby, if you're thinking, you know what, I'm inspired by Chris. That's my name, by the way, folks, if you hadn't already realised from the channel. My name is Chris. I'm going to give this modelling and painting a go, if that's what you're thinking. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to mess up, and that's fine. Of course it's fine. It's how we learn. Just don't get too precious about it. Even with character models, and you'll probably find you do take that little bit of extra care with your character models. You might not. I might be making a whole raft of assumptions there. But certainly in my experience and the experience of my brothers and my friends who are also hobbyists, just realised that's going out of focus, we tend to, as I keep calling this poor Liberator, rank and file troops tend not to get as much love as, say, the character models, which is understandable. As I said in the previous video, this Liberator will be, for my 1,000 points anyway, 1 of 10 on the battlefield, and he's not even the sergeant of the squad, the prime, as they call them in the Stormcast, call them whatever the squad designation is, in this case Liberators, and then the sergeants are called primes. And you probably want to take a little bit more care with your primes, but again, not too much. They are rank and file troopers. As I showed in the previous video, the prime for this squad, he's differentiated anyway because he has a nice head plume going on. That's a nice touch of a nice extra pop of colour. That'll be red. And he also has a double-handed weapon, so he will be separate on the field anyway from the rank and file because he won't be carrying a shield and he's carrying a two-handed weapon and so on and so forth. So as of that, I'm in all likelihood going to lavish a little extra care and attention on him, but again, not too much. He is still a rank and file trooper. I expect him to not survive too long in the greater scheme of things on the tabletop. But that's no excuse to also make a mess. So it's, most people who get into this hobby get into it because they like the notion of painting detailed miniatures. That level of attention and care that you put into your painting, into your hobby. Now here, this little bit here, this is always when it's really deep down there in the armpit, if you will, and you're in the elbow pit. This is where you'll find, as you become more experienced as a painter, your fine motor skills become more developed. At least I hope they do. For your own sanity, if nothing else. And the first time I tried doing this, I think it might have been a Terminator model, years and years ago, I made a mess of everything. I mean, this hasn't been perfectly clean. As you can see, I have just gone slightly over on the armour there. But again, and good lord, when I first started painting, if I'd made a mess like that, as I covered in video 2, brush straight into the water, I need to clean it up, I'd spend more time cleaning up little mistakes like that on a model than actually painting the model, which was enormously frustrating, as you might imagine. So that when I eventually finished the model, though I was happy enough with it, and each model's, I like to think I've made a little bit of progress each time, but certainly those early days, sorry, just scratching my nose there, in those early days, even though I was happy with the finished model, because it took so long, the muse to paint another model immediately after, the inspiration, woefully lacking. Because, oh my lord, a model like this 10, 20 years ago would have taken me days to paint. And as we've seen in these videos, the first one took just under an hour to put the base colours on. And the wash video, the shading video, less than a half hour. I don't expect this layer video to take longer than an hour. I don't think it will anyway. Again, I'm going to have to do a little bit of tidying. As you can see, I have just gone over where the strap overlays on the helmet there. A little bit of a mess there, mea culpa. But again, easily fixable with Retributor armour. I mentioned in the previous video, it is a very thick, heavily pigmented paint Retributor armour, and it is. So it will be able to hide a multitude of sins, I like to think. But there we go. Anyway, so that's the black repainted, the second layer, if you will. If we use that term, toothing coats, not my term, of course. There's the additional layer. It's gone onto the black. Obviously, we've still got more work to do. Highlights to raise the edges of the belt or the folds and the creases of the cloth, but it's given it a bit more depth, a bit more solidity in the blacks that are featured. And that's what the idea of this step is, with all the colours, to make the colours of the model just a bit more robust. So that's the black done. So we'll move next on to, I think, blue maybe? No, let's move on to the gold. Let's go straight into Retributor armour. Wash the palette first of all, get rid of that black because we don't need it. I do like to reuse my palettes wherever I can. I do like to clean my palette. Some folks don't. Some folks, especially because I'm using the wet palette technique. I did promise actually in the previous video I would bring the camera over, so I'll do that now. There's my wet palette. It is quite simply just plastic tub, a bit of cotton wool in the bottom, which I think in this case was a makeup remover pad. I think. And on top of that is a piece of grease-proof paper. You put some water in, then you empty it out. And the idea being that the moisture that's within the makeup pad itself brings fluid up into the paper itself, and you get your wet palette. It's not an invention of mine, not even close to an invention of mine. There are many ways to make a wet palette. That's just my preferred way. You probably don't need it all the time. Honestly, it depends on the viscosity and pigmentation of the paint you're using. The room temperature of the room in which you're painting, believe it or not. But yeah, I just like it because it keeps my acrylics wetter for longer, honestly. But anyway, I digress. So here we are, we're applying the gold, and you can already see that and it's only a light touch of gold, because the original coat and the ink have effectively built a nice matte base layer onto it. The second coat of gold is going real nice and even, nice and thick. And again, you just want to go over the areas which are raised, which are going to, naturally be lit from a light source. And if you imagine the light source, as is in the case with this model, it's coming from above. You're looking for those raised elements which are naturally going to capture the light. I'm not going to go into too much detail, or indeed, again, rank and file trooper, I'm not going to worry too much about object source lighting or anything like that, or OSL as it's known. I tend to think about those things with characters, so as I showed earlier in the video before this, I think it was one before that, one of the two previous videos, the Lord Castellant miniature will be the general of my army. He's not even yet built. I think I will do another video where I'm building it. I don't think it'll take that long, and I'm not sure if it'll even be that interesting really, because it is just assembling according to instructions. But some people like to watch those things. I've watched not too dissimilar videos myself. And for some folks, it's just the crafting, which, people like to just watch someone craft. But what was I getting at? Oh yeah, because he is a character model, he will be given a lot more attention to detail, a lot more consideration, and things like object source lighting. If there is a place for him on the model to use it, I will. I know he carries a warding lantern, as they call it in the game, but I think it's shuttered closed, if memory serves. I know the Lord Veritant, which is a similar model to the Lord Castellant, and one of the knights, the flying knights, they have an open, unshuttered lantern, which is an awesome opportunity for object source lighting. So the idea is that there is actually a piece of light on the model itself. Now, you can just choose to make it look nice and bright, and you don't need to worry too much about object source lighting. I would definitely not recommend too much thought and consideration if you are going to be using it as a rank and file trooper. But again, because the Lord Castellant or a knight, they're a knight, I can't remember. If it's a character model, if you know it's going to stand out on the table, if you want it to draw attention to it, things like object source lighting, they're not too hard to replicate. It takes a bit of practice. I've done it a few times now, and I think it took me 3 or 4 attempts to get it to a point where I feel it looks right. Not perfect, but right. I'm going to have to go over that again in black later on, but that's fine. It is a very nice finished effect, but it is quite a lot of work on a very small part of a small part of the model. And again, you'll see professional painters and competition painters who will do it for perhaps an entire army, or at the very least a full squad. And I have no problem with that. If you have the time and the skill to pull it off, kudos to you. I'm very envious. But again, as this series of videos and this channel is all about just me painting my toy soldiers in a nice and relaxed, easy setting. And as I established in video 1, I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, a great painter. I think my ambition for this channel is just so that people can tune in, watch me paint up a model. They'll be done in series, so each little series of videos will be around a model. I was thinking about whether I'd feature all of the models in each squad. I think that might get a bit boring, for anybody really. So what I might do is, like, say, with this squad, because there's 5 in the squad, 4 of them are rank and file troopers, and there's a sergeant or a Liberator prime. I'll make a video around one of the rank and file, as I am doing right now. I'll then perhaps do another video to complete the prime, as you saw in the previous video, or the one before that. I have started it. In fact, I'll bring him back in just to show again. So I have started the Liberator prime. Sub-assembled, of course, as I mentioned. I think he's at about the same stage as this fella is now, to be honest. Maybe, I can't remember. But when I come around to finishing the prime, I'll probably make a series of videos around me finishing the prime. But I don't think I'll do all 5 miniatures in the squad, because the other 4 are, with the exception of minute details and poses aside, they're fundamentally identical. And I've just gone over again in the black. And that's not that interesting to watch, I wouldn't have thought. I could be wrong. For any people who are interested in this series of videos, and if you're watching it, if you think, no, Chris, no, we want to see all 5 being painted, let me know. Put it in the description below this video. If enough folks say, yeah, we want to see all 5 miniatures being done, then you know what? Your wish is my command. I'll be painting them anyway, and it's no big thing to make a video out of it. It really isn't. As I covered in the first video, my setup is literally my mobile phone on a little tripod immediately in front of me on my desk. And of course, my paints to the immediate left of this shot. I'm not going to do a tour of my desk, no one's interested in that. With my palette and my water just at the background of the shot there, it would not be difficult to set it up for you. But again, let me know. I have a feeling not too many folks will be interested in seeing all 5, especially considering, even I would struggle to ramble on about 5 miniatures which are fundamentally the same. I can't really teach you anything new from miniature to miniature with that. Well, teach you anything new. Hark at me. This video is not about teaching you how to paint. It really isn't. There are far better videos out there in the world to do that. But I don't know, some folks might find it interesting and think, I'm going to try that, what Chris just tried, or I like the way he does that. And some folks might consider that a teaching video. I'm not sure I do, but I'm happy to be proven wrong. So, if people, especially the actual teachers out there in the world, if any of them are watching this and they think, no, Chris, this is a great example, thanks. If not, well, that's cool too. Now you notice I was just painting the trim of the shoulder pad, the inner trim here, this raised bit, and I did that by, when I mix my paint, I tried to flatten the edge of the brush. You might not be able to see that too well with the setup I've got, and it's so lightly just, again, this is a prime example of letting the miniature do the work for you. Just run the edge, that flat edge of the brush, against that raised rim. Don't Don't make life work. Don't make the painting difficult for you. Use the model. Use the ridges that are, the raised ridges and bumps of the model to not dry brush, because it's not dry brushing at all. And dry brushing is a technique I employ quite regularly, especially on my bases. If I was, say, painting a lizardman or a creature with scales, I'd be all over that dry brushing, because, why make work for myself? But this isn't necessarily dry brushing. It's more of a, well, for a start, the brush is not dry. It's very wet. It's got paint on it. But use the tool you have, make that almost like a chisel edge on the paintbrush with the paint, and then use that raised edge of the part of the model that you're using to work in concert with each other. As I mentioned in the previous video, these are fine models, and I know GW are not the only people who make fine models. There are plenty of companies out there who do. I may paint one up myself from another company. Depends on how the mood takes me, to be honest. But the beauty of 3D painting, as opposed to 2D, is that you can let the medium work in your favour. Medium. Come on, Chris. There are some people, very, very talented people out there in the world, who will absolutely use incredible freehand skill to use the 3D elements, the plates and the panels, as if they were painted on 2D to, get that wonderful patterning. Or, I've seen people do, like with Baletan Craftworld for the Eldar, the Craftworld paint scheme traditionally uses a lot of thorns in their artwork, and I've seen some incredible hand-painted thorns on those miniatures, and the Eldar are famously quite the rounded but flat surfaces. So for an artist to be able to do that, I take my hat off to that man or woman. I really do. It's a level of skill and detail that I cannot profess to have. I'm not sure if I necessarily want to learn how to do. Well, that's not true. No, I always like to learn new things, but it's a level of detail which I often think to myself, yes, for character models or for big, like say if you were doing a Wraith Lord or a Wraith Knight for the Eldar, or a Titan for the Imperium, or a Stardrake for the Stormcasts, one of those big centerpiece models. Yep, I want to go all out. I want to bring as much attention to detail into it as I can. But freehand painting is an element I've not quite got in or around to yet. Last year I did paint up my Wraith Knight for my Liberator Craftworld, and much to my chagrin, I decided to paint all of the blisters on that model, all 270 odd of them, as gemstones. Let me tell you now, that was no fun. The finished model looks great, very happy with it, but it's a nice example of, I was all right at gemstones before I did that. Now I'm very, even if I say so myself, really quite good at them. But good Lord, that was a labour of love. Labour of love. Labour of love. And it's not something I necessarily want to repeat. Although I've kind of made my bed with that, because I have also done a Wraith Seer from my Liberator Craftworld. And because I'd done it one way with the Wraith Knight, I had to do it with him again, of course, because a character model, and it's like, oh, victim of my own success/stupidity on that one, I think. Anyway, I'm getting off track. There is the level of this layer's worth of gold on the model. Still quite uniform across the board at the moment, but you can see I've only painted the raised areas. I've left the shade in those shadowed bits, as you would. The next phase of layering will then lift them again, but we'll get to that next. But first, shield time. So I'm just going to move the actual miniature away. I'm going to reload my palette with a bit more gold. And once again, I'm going to concentrate on the reverse of the shield first. Just get that bevel painted in gold. And again, it's just that lightest feather-like dusting of paint. Dusting is perhaps the wrong word because it's wet, not a dust. But it's almost not touching. It's barely, the paintbrush is barely touching the model. And this is another fine example again of letting the model do the work for you. The raised elements, you know, it takes practice. It does take practice. Oh, you see, I've just messed up a little bit there, and I've years of practice and experience painting. And you're going to mess up. I mess up. Everybody messes up. I strongly suspect the heavy metal team over at GW and other professional painters mess up. Of course they do. We're all human. To err is to be human. How you then pick yourself up, dust yourself off and get over that, you know, that's, oops. I suppose that's what marks us out as, you know. It's the difference between, you know, a professional and, well, I'm not in any way professional, but I'm an experienced painter, certainly. You know, as I said in the previous couple of videos, I am nearly 45. I've been doing this since I was 12, so that's what, 33 years. Painting nearly, on and off. Took a few breaks here and there for real life stuff, like going to university and what not. But on and off, I've been painting for about 3 decades. And I still make colossal mistakes. Sometimes I curse myself out when I do it. Other times I just laugh. Especially if it's a silly mistake, which I should know better than, but that's fine. The best thing about it is with painting, of course, if you make a mistake, there's no harm, there's no foul, no one gets hurt. It's just a hobby, something nice to do and relax to. And I learned quite a while ago to lean into making mistakes, not to get flustered or frustrated about it, because otherwise you're just going to drive yourself mad. And as I paint, to chill out and to relax. Kind of counterproductive, wouldn't you think? Anyway, me rambling on again. That's the gold now, applied to both the model itself and to the shield. I will sub-assemble so you can see the gold. And as you can see, we're about halfway there now. So, about 28 minutes in. I've only now got the blue, the silver and the pink, if I decide to do the pink at this stage. We're just going over all ground, just lifting it, making, there's a bit of focus there, making it so that the colours stand out a bit better. So, let's move to the blue. And as before, I'm going to start with the reverse of the shield with the blue, then go back to the model itself, and then come back to the fascia of the blue. Give the reverse of the shield a chance to dry before I move on to the fascia. Oh, I've been saying fascia now for 3 videos. I'm not even sure if that's the right use of the word. I think it is. But if any of my viewers are more literary minded than my good self, if you want to correct me, please feel free to do so. As I have said in a number of videos, we all learn by our mistakes. I am more than happy to be corrected. And again, here's an example of that. Making your brush a chisel. You know, trying to get it as flat as you can and as broad as you can, so that you can bring the brush, the flat edge of the brush, to the edge of the bevel. Pull away from it nicely, and you just get that nice even coat without hitting the gold trim itself. And I prefer to do it by working along the edges first, because that's nice and careful, you know, just nice and controlled. And when I've done the edges, the colouring the middle bit in is exactly like you just colouring in. It's not an excuse to not be neat, but you've got a little more leeway in your fine motor skills aren't quite as challenged to colour in the middle of it. Again, no excuse for sloppiness, but you can afford to just relax into the strokes of painting. And again, same principle on the outside of the bevel. Just layer up your brush, make sure you've got a good amount of brush, a good amount of paint on it. It's a lot of people make the mistake with miniature painting of, because they think it's a small model, they don't need a lot of paint on the brush. And to be fair, if you put too much paint on the brush, it will pool up and perhaps go over the lines or make a mess. And that just, learning to gauge that, honestly, it just comes with experience. Make those mistakes, set out to make the mistakes, overload your brush, work out the viscosity of each paint and go, oh, okay, well, this brush isn't, some paints, because they're more densely pigmented, they've got a stronger viscosity to them, so you actually can afford to overload your brush. Whereas, say, the thinner paints, and certainly your washes, you don't particularly want to overload your brush, because if they're quite watery, they are just going to go everywhere, and you don't want that. Especially if you take so much time and attention to make sure everything's nice and neat, and then just because you've overloaded your brush, you make a mess of everything. Yeah. But there you go. There's the inside of the shield. It's not 100% tidy, but again, it's tidy enough and neat enough for what it is. As I mentioned in video 1, this, when it's finished, will be glued onto the miniature, and you won't be able to see an awful lot of it. I'll demonstrate by. There he is, standing there. You can see the inside of the shield. Of course you can. But it's a fairly basic design. You're not that interested in making sure it's as accurate as, say, the front. And that's my approach toward it. Others differ, of course. I do know painters who are quite precious about every element of the model. And to be fair, their work is arguably better than mine. But you know what? For me, it's more of a... I like getting the models completed so that they're of a reasonable quality, that they look good on the tabletop. They reward some up-close inspection, but none of my models are ever going to win any painting competitions, for example, and I'm fine with that. The lion at a push. If I was to enter into a competition, I'd consider entering the lion, because I did put a lot of time and effort into that. But as I mentioned, like, for example, my brother, who I regularly play with, he is a significantly better painter than I, and even he would admit that competition level painters, they're they're another league. You just need to look at the annual Golden Demon Awards that GW host, and yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to get to that standard of painting. Even if I was to do it full time as a job, I just don't feel I have for one, the eyesight for it, and two, the motor skills, or the patience for that matter. And quite honestly, this is something I do for fun, to enjoy myself, to help, it's therapeutic, it's relaxing, it's calming. I think were I to try and take my craft, such as it is, to competition level, I think I would get more frustrated by it, and I think it would ruin the hobby for me. I feel. I could be wrong. I could get an awfully good kick out of it, but I'm not a naturally competitive person anyway. I'm just not. I genuinely am one of those weirdos who, plays games for the fun of playing games. Even if it is a competitive game, I'm like, yeah, whatever, I had fun. I have friends, I have family who are really not that person. They are, I have cousins who, honestly, it's just not a good idea to play competitive games against them. They do not like to lose. And for them, the fun is in competing, is in winning. And that's cool. It makes them tick, makes them happy. But, yeah, I'm not that guy. And there we go. I think that's as much as I need to do with the blue on this model for now, until we get to the next stage of layering, which will be like highlights. Oh, there we go. And there's a little bit there on the other shoulder pad I've just slightly missed. There we go. And there we go. There's a nice example of what I was talking about earlier on, where the first coat was quite thin. I applied the washes to give them the depth that they needed, and I reapplied the same paints to the raised areas. It has the desired effect of lifting those raised areas, but also it gives the washed outness, probably a better term than that to use. It gives it a more solid block of colour. There you go. I think I'm happy with that as a term. Right, let's have a look. We're at 36 minutes into the video. You know what? I'll apply a bit of pink. Just, you know what? Why not? I have the time to do it. Just wipe that blue off the palette. Let's get some Screamer pink on my palette. Oh, there's always a bit of miss, isn't there? Of course, there's always a bit of miss. The fascia of the shield. Sorry, folks. I'll just get that done now. I'm not going to rush it, because again, rushing it leads to mock-ups, and we don't want that. But I will, again, loosely attach the shield back onto his hand, so we've got it as a, don't have to hold the shield itself. And again, nice and neat. Make that brush edge a chisel as much as you can. And these shields are great because they've got such very robust embossments. They're so forgiving, especially, if you're coming into this hobby new. These miniatures and the new Orc miniatures, the Cruel Boys, their shields are a very similar kind of thing. It's very robust, bold designs that, for a beginning painter, very forgiving, very forgiving. See, and there you go. It's again, I've just let the model do the work for me. Put a little bit of paint on my brush. Not overloading it, but making sure I get enough paint on there. And again, that comes with practice. You get to learn it's going to sound awfully pretentious, this, but the feel of each individual paint. Now, obviously, all paints can be made thicker or thinner with water, but you learn, as you work more with the paint, you learn how much water you're going to need based on if you want it to be quite viscous and malleable, or if you just want it to fall into the gap. And I deliberately made this pallet's worth of blue a little waterier than normal, because I knew it was going to be, I'd require it to sink into especially the space there, just in between the lightning bolts and the haft of the hammer. But there you go. That was quite nice, didn't it? Especially when you consider before I applied this blue, it was like one half of it was very densely pigmented and the other half was quite washed out. Looks much better. Much happier with that. Yeah. Anyway, as promised. Oops, just dropped the shield. Let's move on to the Screamer paint. And actually, dropping the shield there straight after painting it, a lot of people might be like, ooh, you know, you've just painted with wet paint. Acrylics, especially I find the GW acrylics, they're quite robust. You know, it's not the end of the world. My only bugbear is that they're also great for picking up fingerprints, so that's why I use the handle. Anyway, I digress. Let's get some pink on these weapon handles. And again, it's that same technique of, it's not dry brushing, but it might feel like dry brushing. Just very lightly, oh so lightly, load your brush, and then just let the raised ridges of the tape, the weapon's haft tape, catch the brush, so that the paint just falls naturally on the bits you want it to. And again, there'll be some very keen-eyed painters in the world who will be able to draw a line neatly and say, there you go, I've done every individual tape strand, and God bless them for that. I wish I could say I could do that, but these old hands and these old eyes are not going to let me do that anytime soon. There we go. And last but by no means least, silver. Now, I did say in the previous video, I was thinking I might go with Stormcast silver, but I'm going to go with Runefang steel as a try, because I've got a feeling Stormcast silver might be a shade too bright. Stormcast silver is very much, you know, elves, that kind of brilliant silver. Runefang steel, I think, is a little... It's still quite bright, but I think it gives you a bit more. It's not quite as brilliant. But we're going to try it. Again, load my brush up, make it into a nice chisel, especially when you're doing edge highlights. I'm just going to take a piece of the hammer, let's say this top edge here, like this. Oh, sorry, you can't see that, can you folks? Sorry. If I just take this bit here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at how the light falls on it, because this is one of those cases where I do want to use OSL slightly. The light's coming directly down, and you see from the natural shadowing that this part here probably wouldn't have as much light, whereas here would. Just very gently, very carefully, whisper the brush over. Nice, I like that. Yeah, I think Stormcast still, yeah, it's going to work for me, that, yeah. And again, it's just very, again, it's that same kind of gentle, it might feel like dry brushing, but not dry brushing technique of just gently wisping the brush on the raised parts of the hammer that you want it to touch on. Let the model do the work for you. And again, because it's a rank and file troop, you don't want to get too bogged down in the making sure every single weapon is perfectly painted or perfectly highlighted. You'll do your best, of course. You don't want to make a mess of it, but give it a little bit of time, a little bit of love. But you certainly don't want to drive yourself crazy over it. You know, I've got another 9 of these hammers to paint up minimum. When I extend into the 2,000 point army, I'll be adding things like retributors and prosecutors. It's a lot more hammers to paint up. And because they're both fairly elite squads, I am going to give them a little more attention. But again, I mean, retributor squad's a 5-man squad. Prosecutors are 3 men. But they've got like twin hammers. That's another 6 hammers, so 11 more hammers to paint. You don't want to get too bogged down. Make sure every single hammer is perfect. Again, unless of course you are going for a modelling competition or a painting competition, like the I forgot the name of the competition they call it in workshop, where you get a 24-inch by 24-inch board, and I can't remember what it's called. Now, I actually feel that this silver's still a little, the contrast between that and the lead belch is still a little too strong. So I may come back to the hammer. In fact, I'm almost certainly going to come back to the hammer to add another wash of Nuln Oil, but it'll be a watered down wash, just to kind of glaze it. And for those who are unfamiliar with the term glazing within a painting context, it is exactly that. It's you're applying a very, very thin coat of the wash to gradually build up layers of shade on it. So I'm going to take some, well, let's wash my palette off first, get rid of that silver. And as I said in the previous video about how Nuln Oil can be quite oily and thick, which it is, this is a prime example of using Lamian Medium. Lamian Medium works a treat for thinning down your brushes but maintaining the pigmentation integrity of the paint, whereas water would kind of washes away some of it. I'm just going to use a 1-to-1 mix of Lamian Medium and Nuln Oil. Load up my brush, and again, very sparingly, very lightly, just gently go along the panels. Just give it a bit of a wash, just slightly dull down that Stormcast silver, not too much, you know. Try and avoid the edges, because the edges, of course, if you look at a real hammer, the edges do tend to be a little brighter because they're the impact points, and that's where, you know, microscopic flecks of the metal itself chip away and you get that brighter edge. There we go. Yeah, I'm much happy with that. The Stormcast silver did a really nice job of lifting from the lead belcher, but it was a bit too much of a contrast. It was too bright, too brilliant, too sharp. I think Iron Breaker, which is the next one up from lead belcher, for me it doesn't do quite a good enough job. It's not a very good mid-tone, whereas Stormcast silver nicely lifts it, and then a nice glaze of Nuln Oil again. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I think the thing is with silvers, or any metallic for that matter, is you only really find out what it looks like once it dries, which sounds odd, I know. All paints look differently when you're applying, but metallics are especially that. And I've just observed that I've missed a bit with the silver. So in fact, what I'll do is I'll take this opportunity to use Iron Breaker to show you what I mean. How I don't think it's that great as a mid-tone. Now that's just my personal opinion. Lots of folks swear by it, but I'll load up my brush, and it's this little embossed relief on this scabbard of the Gladius. I'm applying lead Iron Breaker, and as you can see, it's quite dark. You know, it doesn't really do it for me. So what we'll do is get my Stormcast silver again, just a tiny amount to give my brush that flat edge, that chisel edge I'm after. And again, just go along the edges where the light would catch. There we go. Happy enough with that. And again, I'll wait for that to dry. That might also need a Nuln Oil glaze. We shall see once it dries. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. Yeah, not too bad. And then last but by no means least, we have our... Oh, there's always something I miss, isn't there? Always something I miss. Back to my Stormcast silver. And as I was saying in the previous video, when I was painting the tabard and putting the shade on the tabard, on the chainmail bit, I preferred to use blue ink. This is a really nice example of using Stormcast silver, and the contrast you get from the Stormcast silver over a blue washed chainmail is lovely, because it even though it is still quite a vibrant, brilliant metal, and it is, the blue wash naturally tones it down. It's great for things like that. And again, you're just trying to let the chainmail do the job of lifting Again, it's that feeling of dry brushing. You're not dry brushing. I don't suppose dry brushing in this instance wouldn't be too bad an idea, actually. Here being chainmails, quite like scales and what have you. But I prefer to only dry brush when a model genuinely calls for it. So if it's got scales like a dragon or a lizardman, or if it's terrain features on a model, they warrant dry brushing. Now you notice there I've actually gone over the blue with the silver, and I am using the watering down effect on this one because it's just easier to do that. To go back over it again in blue, and I think I've become a victim of my own hubris here. And oh, that's not too bad. There you go. Nice. Not bad. Not bad at all. Quite happy with that. Now those studs on the terre rouges, which are these little things that hang down here, they look a bit bold in contrast at the moment. But as I layer up the terre rouge, and that's the next stage, next video, the contrast will be less pronounced. I am going to go over that bit in blue again, just bothering me. In fact, I'll do that off camera because I still need to do the white. So, and I've got 9 minutes before. I'm trying to keep this video less than an hour. So, last bits. It's these nice little lightning bolts that are coming from the hammer on the shoulder pad. Again, chisel flat your brush, chisel flat your brush. Let the model do the work for you. Oop, gone over the blue again there. Again, it's not the end of the world. I'll fix that off camera. I don't want to bore you good folks, but that's exactly what I was on about. Like before, you're gonna make mistakes even at this point. It's not the end of the world. It really isn't. Make the mistakes, learn. So next time you do paint something like this, and if you are painting a squad, like if you make a mistake on one, you'll realise when you come to the next one, I made a mistake with that bit. Let's try to avoid that this time. There we go. That's not too bad, is it? Not too bad at all. Obviously, it's not white yet, but the next stage will be edge highlights along the armour and picking out the more detailed highlights of, say, things like the tape wrapping on the handles. We'll be picking out that in a lighter stage of the pink. The lightning bolts that come from the hammer, they'll have a white rather than a grey. And I'll build up those scales of white because I'll be using, I think I've got 2 different whites for that. The gold armour itself, there is I forgot what it's called, I think it's Liberator gold, I think it is. It's a really nice gold / silvery metal. It's really nice. I'm really a big fan of Liberator gold, which is, nice coincidence considering we're painting Liberators. But then on top of that, I'd go with a bit of silver for the points or where the vertices of the armour, if you will. And we'll cover that in the next video. But there you go. Just under an hour to get the next layer stage complete on this chap. Once again, thank you for all watching, for those of you who do. If you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe. And also put in the comments any questions, challenges, corrections, of which I imagine there'll be a few, and suggestions if you do want to see me paint all 5 models in a unit. I can't see most people would, but if I get enough call for it, I will. Similarly, if there's any specific unit from either Age of Sigmar or 40k you'd like to see me paint up, I'll give it the old college try, especially if it's one that I don't normally paint. But yeah, I think that's all for today, or for this session anyway. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're all well, and I shall see you all next time. Ta-ta!